In this one, I'm going to talk about technology and how it changes, particularly the movement from simplicity to complexity. I get a lot of people saying, essentially, in my comments section mostly, the good old days were better, everything's too complicated now, too expensive, we should go back to the way we were. Everything works that way. Saying it's bad, which sometimes it is, and that we should go back, it just makes no sense at all. Because the overall movement towards that higher complexity has benefits that make it worthwhile. Let's take an example. I've got a 1932 Chevrolet. I got a 1955 Thunderbird. And I've got a 1916 Ford Taurus. If I go from that Chevrolet and I look at the technology used with that one and compare that to the 55 Thunderbird, there's very little resemblance. The Thunderbird is far more technologically advanced. It has fewer maintenance problems. It lasts longer. The brakes work better. Virtually everything in that car is better than the 32 Chevrolet. Not that the 32 Chevrolet isn't fun, it's kind of cool. But I take that car, compare it to the Thunderbird, and there's a world of difference between those two. And if I was going to go across country in a car, I'd go in the Thunderbird. I certainly wouldn't go in the Chevy. There's too many things going to break. Then I can take that comparison, make it further to a 2016 Ford. There isn't any oil or lubrication spots. There hasn't been an oil lubrication spot on a car for many years. I used to work on cars. Geez, I remember these 1950s cars. You had 32 lube spots in some of these things. I mean, you had to lube everything. You had to change the oil every couple thousand miles. You don't do any of that stuff anymore. The car is far more complex. You don't have to know much about it. It gets better fuel economy. Everything about this car is better, except it's harder to work on and it's more expensive. Not really more expensive, it's about the same. And look at a few of the things that are on these things. Now, I'm sure airbags were available in the 32 Chevy. They just didn't put them on. Pretty much if you got in an accident in one of those things at any speed, you were seriously injured or killed. Now, I can get hit really hard before there's going to be a life-threatening injury. These cars are so much safer, it's crazy. And you can say all the negative things you want about the cars. I can't fix them anymore, stuff like that. Well, by the way, I do fix, haven't had to fix much, but on the Ford, the Taurus. I haven't had to fix much in that thing, but I have had some things I had to deal with. And I did it. I've done it to every car I've ever owned. You just have to change with the times, and that's part of what I'm talking about here. When I'm looking at a furnace, and let's say, okay, let's take an old furnace or an old ductwork system, put it in say the late 40s or into the 50s. Okay, ducted furnaces were fairly new then. They had octopus furnaces, but most of them weren't fan forced or anything. But when they started fan forcing them, they started making a lot of the ductwork similar to what we have now. However, the furnaces came with a very small fan. They didn't need to blow a lot of air because everybody was used to having very hot air coming out of their ducts. And if you change that, then put a lot more air out, you'd have cooler temperatures in the ducts. Remember the people that loved to stand on the floor furnace grill because it was so hot and warm. The only problem is if you slipped and fell on that grill, you'd burn yourself unless you had some heavy clothing on because those things were hot. Okay. They didn't have the fan force, you know, maybe they would run 500 cubic foot a minute in a lot of these things. Okay. Start fast forwarding to around 1990. And efficiency was finally being looked at and said, okay, the quote 80% furnace is no longer an 80% furnace. It never was. You have to have different ways of testing these things. You can't just do a steady state efficiency test and say, okay, it's an 80%er, because that doesn't, it isn't how it works. The seasonal efficiency is much more accurate. Well, when manufacturers were confronted with the fact that they had to make their furnaces higher efficiency, the first thing they did is put big fans on them. That's the first thing you do for higher efficiency, because you move more air, you got a different temperature split between the heat exchanger and the air coming across, you get better performance. Well, then we had the problem of someone who had this ductwork that was designed to run with 500 CFM. So what do you do then? Okay, the result of that became the ECM motor that everybody just loves to hate. Well, it was a way of making the furnace and the ductwork a little more compatible than it was before, and it saves some energy in the lower speeds. But once you start retrofitting these furnaces into these older systems, there were a couple of problems. One is if you put a monster fan in there, you had a lot of noise, and if you use something like an ECM, it would adapt itself to the ductwork. Still may make quite a bit of noise, but it was a way of helping there. Other things, ignition. God, how many furnaces did I see that had 2 pilot lights? Old standing pilot. Pilot burned probably $10 worth of gas a month. And had 2 of these stupid pilots. Huge things. That was inefficiency unchained, guys. It was crazy. And they were kind of a pain in the butt because they were hard to work on. And, you know, standing pilots were simple, but they didn't work very good. They kept blowing out for various reasons. And so we started getting in, you know, pilotless ignition, intermittent pilot, that sort of stuff. Honeywell came out with the S86. I think it was the early 80s. They first come out and they started doing retros. They were a mess. They didn't work. A lot of times when this new technology comes out, it does not work well. We had to, of all the retrofits, I think 2/3 of them we had to pull back out the first year. So there are problems, and there's always problems when technology changes. But the end result is you end up with a product that's better. And one other thing about that product, it's harder to work on. And so I say to you that if you think we should go back to simplicity and get some sort of 80% furnace from the 50s and put it in our homes and use twice as much energy as we would use now, you're lost. You're not adapting. We're about repair. We fix things that are manufactured now. And we have to adjust to how things are manufactured now. And understand the overall increase in lifespan and quality is there. A lot of guys will tell you, well, that old standard 80% furnace will last forever. But yeah, but it used an awful lot of fuel. And some of the old conversion burners, you could buy a new furnace with 5 or 6 years of fuel usage in that thing because they use so much fuel. We can't afford to use the fuel that way, and we have to have ways of using less of it. And so in the future, you're going to see more complex systems yet. The entire system that we work with, the furnaces, say gas furnaces, they're pretty much as efficient as they're going to get. But we're going to find better ways of getting the heat where it needs to be to keep people comfortable. Anyway, that's my gripes about those of you that seem to think we should go back and mow our lawns with push mowers or something like that. That's it on this one.